You look at what they're doing in various Caribbean islands. You look at what they're doing in Africa. It's pretty much the same. And of course, the Caribbean islands are an extension of African people because we came there first before we came to North America by way of the transatlantic slave trade. And even before the slave trade, Africans had been going to the Caribbean and to North Central South America. But let me say this. We as African people have a problem of thinking that our enemy's enemy is our friend. We thought this back in the 60s during the Cold War, during the African independence explosion. There was also a belief that our enemy's enemy is our friend. And so some of our independence leaders sought assistance from Russia because they thought, not because they were communists. And a lot of people who don't understand Pan-African history, they will think that certain Pan-Africanists were communists just because they saw aid from Russia. That was not the case. It was not an ideological alignment. It was a need for resources and military equipment. But nonetheless, the Russians were not interested in African liberation any more than the Americans were. They were simply looking for a way into the continent so they could exploit the resources. You see China doing the same thing again. So that was the first Cold War between America and Russia. Now we're in the second Cold War between America and China. Same thing, 50 years later, the exact same thing. You have African leaders running to China as opposed to America, looking for aid. But the question is, in exchange for what? The Chinese are not in Africa or Jamaica or in any other part of the Caribbean because they care about African people. They are there to exploit and control. Now, the reason why African leaders are so quick to call on the Chinese for aid is because they are lazy and self-serving. I want to say this again.
Go ahead.
The reason African leaders are so quick to run to China for aid is because they are self-serving. And let me explain what I mean by this. When Mao Zedong, the liberator of China, took over, and I'm no fan, I'm giving an example. I don't believe you should have heroes of other races. So Fidel Castro is no hero. Che Guevara is no hero. Mao Zedong is no hero. Part of African fundamentalism is all heroes look like you. All of them. If they don't look like you, they're not a hero. And if you have a hero from another race, then you're basically practicing cultural imperialism against yourself. So what Mao Zedong did, he shut China's borders down. And he sent Chinese children around the world to study what everybody else was doing. And China, which at the time was not known for manufacturing or producing much, over the next 30 years would have a renaissance, an economic renaissance, where now today China is the #1 producer of everything in the world. But here is where it's important. Mao Zedong initiated a cultural revolution. This is important. China's cultural revolution gave birth to the economic revolution. China's cultural revolution gave birth to the economic revolution. He made them study who they were as Chinese. He made the artists produce a Chinese cultural renaissance. They wrote books. They did plays, art. He sold the Chinese to themselves. And once he got the Chinese proud enough to be Chinese, they were now able to give birth to the economic renaissance that put China where it is today. Now, Mao Zedong was no saint. He had his faults like all leaders did. But China is where they are now because he understood the essential importance of shutting down the border. Stop letting American media in here. Stop letting American products in here. Stop letting the Russians come in and sell our children a dream that it is better to be a Russian than be a Chinese. But here's the Trivia question.
Yes.
Who did Mao Zedong get that idea from? He borrowed that from the Honorable Marcus Garvey. Mao Zedong, just like Hitler, just like Mussolini, just like most of them, although Marcus Garvey was not a racial imperialist as they were, they all studied and copied Garvey. Mao Zedong took Garvey's program of selling the African to himself first, which gave birth to the Black Star Line and gave birth to the African Factories Corporation and gave birth to the largest Black movement in modern history. And he took that and he built China with Garveyism. Mao Zedong built China with Garveyism. So African leaders don't want to do that. They don't want to use the technique of Garvey, okay, that Mao Zedong used. And Ho Chi Minh admitted he used it. Ho Chi Minh, the liberator of Vietnam, who beat the Americans in the Vietnamese War, admitted that he studied Garvey. He admitted that he used the principles of Marcus Garvey to liberate Vietnam. So let me get this straight. The Chinese can use Garvey. The Vietnamese can use Garvey. Pan-Africanism. But African leaders don't want to do that because they're too lazy. See, it's easier to get the loan from China. It's easy. China says, here go 10 million US. Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Botswana, Lesotho, Malawi, Kenya. Here's 10 million US. Let me make this point. Here's 10 million US. You can build hospitals, schools, factories. And here's the point. Because the masses are politically uneducated in any country, any race, any community, Black, white, rich, poor, all they see is what appears to be progress. So guess what? Dr. Umar's the president of Angola, okay? And I just got a $10 million loan from the Chinese. And I'm using this $10 million and I'm putting people to work. I'm building houses, new roads. It looks like I'm progressive, don't it? It looks like I'm building up Angola. Here's the problem. What the Angolan people don't know, and I'm only using Angola as an example here, random example. What the people don't know is your children and their children and their children are going to have to pay back the debt on the $10 million loan that the Chinese gave President Ifa Tunde that I'm using to make your life so comfortable. But while your life is being made comfortable, your great-grandchildren will be paying off this loan to the Chinese for the next 250 years.
So then you mean to tell me, you mean to tell us that the debt, the loan, is just a way to lock the continent totally down and put it in their pocket? That's what you saying?
In fact, if I'm not mistaken, and I need to double check, if I'm not mistaken, and I need to double check, I believe Angola does have a Chinese loan. Isn't it? I need to double check.
Is probably the number one or number two Chinese, obviously,
investment site.
Investment site is probably
So,
number one because of the gold and diamond and everything there.
Yes, I believe it's Angola, but there's one country in Africa right now, at least one, could be Angola. I think it's Angola, but I'll double check it, where they have already defaulted on a Chinese loan. Have already
Zambia. I think it's
loan.
Zambia. And
Okay,
they took
maybe
the
Zambia.
port. And they took the port. I think they took the
Yes,
the port.
as a repayment for the default on the loan. And let us be clear, in these contracts that African nations are signing with the Chinese, what they're giving away in exchange for the loan default is worth significantly more than the loan itself. This is the point. This is the point. And what you have to give the Chinese in exchange for the loan is permanent. In other words, the Chinese don't just get the port of Zambia, for example, for 10 years or 20 years, and then they give it back. They get the port forever. Why would you sign a loan that gives an alien people, if you default on the loan, the right to take possession of a natural resource or an essential geographic location forever? not for 50 years, not for 100 years, forever. So do you know what that means? In many respects, that makes the Chinese loan equally, and in some cases worse, than the American loans. And I'm not putting loan against loan because we shouldn't be taking none of them. I want to be clear. Foreign aid is killing the African continent. Foreign aid is a noose around the neck of Africa. And every time you get another loan, the noose gets pulled tighter and tighter. I like to compare it to drinking seawater. You're really thirsty, and the only water around is the salt water. And you drink it at first and you feel a little bit better. And then, but it makes you thirstier. So you think you drink some more seawater and you drink some more seawater. And before you know it, you're dead, because taking in too much seawater and the salt will kill you. That is what loans is doing to Africa. You think it's helping, but it's really hurting because it's putting our people into debt for the hundreds of years.
Wow, moving to the military power, because we keep pounding on the military power. The Chinese, on the other side, we got the Americans and the Europeans, all this NATO, moving bases in Africa. Then now we having Chinese getting bases in Africa, militarize the continent. What is your take about it? This is the agenda of now, okay, we got the loan. The people might going to react, so let us position ourselves military-wise, just so when they revolt against us, we're going to put them in sleep. What is your take about the military gathering movement? On one side you have the European, the Americans, and then on the other side we have the Chinese moving military. Actually, they even got control of police stations. I think if I'm not mistaken, in some countries of South Africa, not South Africa, but in some African countries, they actually controlling even the police station. What is your take about the military force? Because ultimately, if we allow them to have the military bases in the continent, we're pretty much done. What is your take about it, Dr. Uwe Johnson?
The question that I would ask any leader of an African country that has allowed the military bases of China to be there, and there's several, how can you claim to be a sovereign nation? There is no such thing as a sovereign nation that allows a foreign military to operate on its soil, except for the embassy or except during times of war. But in times of peace, you don't allow a foreign military to operate on your soil and look in their own interests, not in your interests. They're operating on African soil in their own interests during a time of peace. In my opinion, that automatically means that you have communicated in conversation or contract. You have communicated in conversation or contract that the Chinese and their behavior in Africa is sovereign and supersedes any governmental oversight. The Chinese have been given the right to do what they want, and not even the government can step in and stop them. And I'm going to tell you what the future holds right now. And I hate to say it.
Go ahead.
There's going to be a conflict in one of these countries where the Chinese are going to do something so disrespectful and so egregious that the Africans are going to push back. And when they push back, it's going to trigger, okay, a conflict between Africans and Chinese. And when that happens, the Chinese are going to show you who they really are. And when that happens, African governments are going to have their backs pushed up against the wall. Because what's going to happen is the Africans are going to allow the Chinese to get away with it. You know why? Because the Chinese are paying them under the table. They're being paid under the table to make these deals. Please be clear. They're not just doing this to do it. They're doing this because the Chinese are paying them to do it. And so what's going to happen is they're going to have to side with the Chinese. And when they do that, they're going to be overthrown in a coup by the people, a popular coup. And then the Americans are going to come in with their military and in essence, Don't be surprised if World War III begins on African soil.
Wow, wow, that's what we're heading to. What is your take about the United Front? Because I think it's about time for us to really start thinking of militarize ourselves, not only in the United States, in the continent, like building a military unity just so we can protect our villages. Because right now, as we speak, Chinese are taking over the villages. They don't even want the town. They're going to the villages because it's the village where all the mineral resources are. What is your take? Because people so quick, they don't really understand or understand the wealth in Africa lies in the villages, not in towns, not in the cities, in the villages. What is your take, Dr. Omar Johnson?
Here's the problem with the militarization of the continent. African people are so in debt to China and Europe that those loans that they get and that foreign aid that they get is never going to provide them with the weapons that they need to fight against the person bringing them the aid. In other words, China is not going to give Africa the weapons it needs to defeat China. America is not going to give Africa the weapons that it needs to defeat America. China is the #1 producer of small arms in the world. The #1 producer of small arms in the world. And the weapons that they send to Africa are the old weapons that they don't even use anymore. And they send them with the intent of only being able to subdue local domestic conflict. Nobody outside of Africa is going to provide Africa with the weaponry that's going to stop them from exploiting Africa. That's never going to happen. But Africa has enough engineers. Africa has enough minds, okay? And when I say Africa, I'm talking about the continent and the diaspora, where Africa can begin to create the weapons that she needs to defend herself from a foreign invasion. But the problem is, very few African leaders are that visionary, that they are thinking seriously about preparing Africa for invasion. See, the good thing about Africa is that although you do have wars between countries is not the biggest civil issue in Africa. It is wars within countries. The tribalism is the biggest cause of military conflict in Africa. It's not between nations, it's within the nation, which is a good thing. It's bad that they're fighting within the nation, but at least we don't have country wars as bad as it could be. With that being said, the African Union and the independent African states need to start holding conferences where they talk about the militarization of the African continent. One of the things that really hurt Africa in that regard was AFRICOM, the Africa Command that former President Barack Insane Obama put over there. See, once they let Obama come in with the AFRICOM, putting U.S. military bases in most African nations, many of the strategic high resource African nations, that almost neutralized Africa's ability to repel an invasion, because now you have American military and Chinese military on an African continent without almost no African military bases that could last a day in that war with them. But let me say this one point. I'm still hopeful, even though we don't have the military technology, and I'm gonna tell you why. As a student of military science, what I do know is this: the people who control and know the land where the war is fought are at a significant advantage, even when they don't have the same level of military technology. When you look at Somalia versus the US military, when you look at Vietnam versus the US military, when you look at Russia versus Afghanistan, if you study war And we have to start studying war because we don't. When you study war, you notice that even when the army is ill-equipped, even when the army is outnumbered, and they will not outnumber us because there's more Africans than Chinese or Europeans, even when they have greater military technology, our knowledge of the land gives us a significant advantage. You look at the African independence movements. How did the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army, the so-called Mau Mau, they were so successful against the British because they knew the land. You look at Amilcar Cabral and Guinea-Bissau and that independence movement. When you know the land, you can still win. And that's why I am still hopeful that even though they have the military technology, they don't know Africa like we know Africa.
So you mean to tell me the same thing as Ethiopia when they defeated the Italian, the Angolan when they defeat the Portuguese? That's what you're trying to say.
Yes.
When you have the knowledge of your land, so it ultimately is about boots on the ground. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that also means something else, though. We have to stop teaching the land to the aliens. We have a bad habit of teaching the Europeans and the Chinese and the Arabs everything about our country, and we have to stop doing that. The first thing the military do when they show up is they survey the land. That's the first thing they do, because wars are fought on land and you have to know the land. And so you have Africans teaching invaders the secrets of the land, and we have to stop doing that.